So our next speaker is Michael Watson about socially distant imaging, I guess. Over to you, Michael.
First of all, let me just check to make sure I can be heard. If someone could just tell me yes or no. Yes. Okay, great. Well, hello everybody, and good evening, middle of October, as we get to the end of summer. It's great to be back at a Toronto Centre meeting, and thank you, Paul, for inviting me to speak about my favorite passion, as many of you will know, which is astrophotography, in this most unusual of years, I can say. And when Paul was asking what I might talk about, I decided that the appropriate subject would be this: physically distanced astrophotography during a pandemic. Now, you might think, well, duh, because any serious astrophotography is physically distanced, particularly if you're doing deep sky work and you have to get out of the city, as I do. I think it's fair to say that serious astrophotographers aren't very close to other astronomers when they're doing their work. So this is just, as I say here, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. This year has been it's been an interesting year in a whole bunch of ways. But for astronomy in particular, we've in the early part of the pandemic, following the middle of March, everybody was advised not to, to stay indoors, not to go out of the city, and in Ontario, certainly all of our provincial parks were closed. I'll tell you a little story that in, I think it was early April, I went up one nice new moon, dark night evening in the middle of the week to Torrance Barrens, which is, of course, a dark sky preserve, where I'd gone on in many previous years. I don't go there much any longer because, frankly, it's getting a little bit too bright. I couldn't believe it when I got there. It wasn't that there were astronomers there, there were partiers there. It was unbelievable. Hundreds of cars, and I managed to find a little spot that I thought would be okay, managed to get all of my gear set up, which takes about 3/4 of an hour. Then the OPP came in, the provincial police, and said, everybody has to leave. The park is closed at night. Well, that's kind of, Mr. Officer, when I go out, you got to leave too. So another half hour to take down the equipment, drive back to Toronto, and that was it. However, later on, the parks did reopen, and I went up to my favorite spot, which is Algonquin, as many of you who follow my astrophotos know, Algonquin Park. And what was really interesting in the few times that I've been there this summer is certainly in June and July and August. Well, June and July primarily, there was hardly any road traffic, and it was incredibly quiet. The offices were closed. The students who come in from around the globe to work at the park were completely absent. It was very quiet, which was fantastic, but just a little bit strange. And then, of course, things have opened up recently. So I managed to get out a little bit, and I just thought that what I would do is show you just a few photos that I've managed to get over the pandemic months. And I have to say that only about half of them I've managed to process so far. So this is from May, actually back into April until this morning, and I'll finish up with that. So I thought that what I would do is start with the easy stuff that you can shoot from the city using just a tripod and camera. And I, in addition to sort of really good technical photographs, those of you who follow me know that I like to do pictorial astrophotos as well. And so an example is this. I really like shooting the moon during the daytime. You can get subtle gradations that you can't of both color and brightness that you really can't get quite as much at night. And if there is a scudding cloud across the sky, you can make what I think is a really nice photo such as this. Just was taken with a 400mm lens, short exposure on a tripod, and that can be really a lot of fun. This was back in April. Oh dear. Well, I don't know why. Why would that be? Let me just check here. Okay, can you see that? Okay, everybody. Oh, so sorry. All right, something went wrong there. Okay, well, this is the first one. So this is what I was talking about, 400 millimeter lens photo of the waxing gibbous moon. And so we move on here, and this shows, again, I really do like shooting the moon during the day. It's a very different view. It's you don't often see a photograph like this with a blue background, and I'm going to tell you that these are not enhanced colors. This is what it looks like, obviously with a little bit of contrast added in processing, and then just turning it around so as to make it a slightly bigger picture on the same afternoon. You can get an awful lot of detail here. And down in this corner, I hope that that you can see my cursor. You can see in these two particular Maria, and it's really interesting. If you do a little bit of color saturation, there are very different colors and shadings here. This part tends to be much bluer, and this part slightly yellower, particularly when you're photographing at night. And I found that actually to be really, really interesting. So the moon is always fun to shoot. And then back in April, the almost full moon. And I think you can actually see it a little bit more here. You see what it's a slate gray with maybe just a slight bit of blue, and then a more yellow tinge there, which I interpret as being a different age and possibly composition of the lava flows that produce the Maria. So there's the waxing gibbous moon. This is one of my favorite shots recently. This was right at the end of April. Managed to get a really nice, clear, and steady, more than clear even, night to, or sort of early mid-twilight to photograph the waxing crescent moon. And another view of this as well. Earthshine is one of my favorite things. It can be tricky to photograph, but with some careful work and some post-processing, you can show some really good earthshine with even with a fairly fat crescent moon here. This is taken through 152 millimeter or 6-inch diameter refracting telescope, and this happened to be in quite a rich star field, and I really like views like this. We got a good one actually this morning with Venus. You'll see just one photograph of that at the end of the presentation. This one I really like. This is really just a pictorial one, taken handheld with a 400 millimeter lens up at our family cottage in Muskoka, and it was actually on Independence Day, Tom Cruise Day, July 4th, and the full moon was rising in the southeast, of course, because the full moon in the summer is very low in the sky. And I'm going to tell you that was the color. A lot of people see that photograph and wonder, well, you must have enhanced it. No, that was the color. I attribute this real orange, and this is exactly how it looked to the unaided eye and also in binoculars, to particulate matter that had blown eastward to eastern North America from the fires that we all know were burning in California and the Pacific Northwest. So this was quite a remarkable sight to me. It was very interesting. Okay, now. So Venus, we know that Venus has been very prominent in the sky. First of all, in the evening sky, earlier in the spring, and then now in the morning sky. This is one of the great years to see Venus. We get this apparition almost exactly the same way every 8 years. And so I think that we all know from this graphic that Venus passed very close to Aldebaran and was passing through Taurus and very close to the Pleiades, with what happened to be very good weather for people in Ontario in April. And so managed to get a photograph here. This is taken through the telescope, and this is right from our parking pad in Midtown Toronto. And so the stars won't necessarily be immediately obvious to you, but this, of course, is the Pleiades. And there we have Venus very close, really bright, about as bright as you can get at magnitude minus 4.6, with really really close to the Pleiades. And you don't get that very often. It's going to be years before we get that again. Venus was passing through the Pleiades, and we had a couple of cloudy nights, but then just a little bit later, 3 days later, it had moved past the Pleiades, and we see the Pleiades there on the right. This is with a shorter focal length telescope, about 540 millimeters instead of 660 millimeters. And by the way, I think that there have been discussions. Blake had talked about, Arnold had talked about the about teleview refractors. Those are the ones that I use for this kind of work. And this was just such a great view, and something that you can see from and photograph from the city using a fairly modest equatorial mount, and a fairly decent telescope. So that was Venus passing by. And then, and I'm not going to pretend that this is a good photograph at all. However, I shot this with my 152 millimeter 6-inch refractor that has a focal length of about 1250 millimeters. This is incredibly cropped. This is the Crescent of Venus, just one very, very short photo. So no one's going to pretend that this is a great photo. I'll liken it to what Galileo saw 400 years ago, but it does show that you can get something that's kind of interesting to see. Even with a short focal length telescope. Then we have, of course, the Moon and Venus moving into the morning sky after July, and back in August, the waning crescent moon, with a fairly fat crescent there and visible Earthshine, was passed quite close to Venus, and so this was the middle of August. I really, I did like this. It was really very pretty to see, just gorgeous naked eye and binoculars. This is a 200 millimeter lens. And then going in a little closer that same evening, we can see this with the moon, a bunch of stars, and Venus. Now, this is this morning. So I got up early a couple of times just to check. It was clear. This is from our back deck again in Midtown Toronto. And this was the view with brilliant Venus this morning. Really, really nice view. I just really like this an awful lot. So this is really easy to do pictorial astrophotography. And I will say that I was physically distanced from my wife because she was still in bed. And there I was out in the gathering morning twilight photographing this. Okay, so we know that this was the summer of the best comet we have had in probably a generation. This was, it was difficult to see early on. This was in late, I think it was late May, and I'd gone out in a couple of evenings. This is actually from Toronto, from Midtown Toronto. I'd gone out to a schoolyard and had tried to find the darn thing, managed to sweep it up barely in binoculars, and thought, well, listen, why not try with a 200 millimeter lens? And I was actually quite shocked to get any tail. But I did, from the city, and so that was kind of fun to get. And I was hoping then that we would have a decent view of this, but I knew that in order to get anything at all, I'd have to get out of the city. And when I got this photograph, the parks had not yet opened, so I couldn't get up to Algonquin. But very shortly after that, they did, as I say. And so I got up to Algonquin, and here I am set up, and this is May, as you can see. Set up with my astrophysics mount, and I've got two telescopes mounted side by side here. Some of you have seen these pictures before. The sort of black, gray one is an Explore Scientific triplet refractor in a carbon fiber tube. That's the one that I do my moon photos in. And then the Teleview refractor, which is beside it, which is what I do most of my decent, I won't put it any higher than that, deep sky photos. And by the way, if you take a look at, if you see the red mounting rings, it's very difficult to find really good mounting rings and plates that will fit telescopes. And that came from, I ordered from an Italian company, and managed to get them here and there. It's an unbelievably beautiful equipment. So that's the stuff I use. You'll see two Kendrick batteries down there at the bottom. I use two of them, one to run the telescope drive and the other to run the dew heaters. Okay, moving on. So this is one of the photos that I managed to get the first evening up in Algonquin. This is taken with a 200 millimeter lens mounted piggyback on the telescope. And I was really pleased. I'm not going to say it's the greatest photograph. It's not. It's grainy and so on, but it was low in the sky, almost due north in Ursa Major. But I was very pleased to be able to get not only the gold-yellow dust tail, but also the blue ion or plasma tail, which you don't necessarily often see with comets. Not that we get that many, but I was really pleased to get that. And then I shot a closer view with the TeleVue 127 or millimeter or 5-inch diameter telescope, and that is this one. This photograph was above the editorial page or the editorial in one of the recent issues of Sky News magazine. And again, you can see some of the ion tail there. And I should tell you, this photograph was made, you'll find it hard to believe, with a stack of 30-second exposures. That's all, using my Nikon D810A camera that many of you will be familiar with the very typical green head that comets typically show. So here, just some other stuff that I managed to get during the summer. I don't know whether you're going to be able, without lines, to be able to figure out what the heck that is. So this is looking due north, and what do we have here? The bowl of the Dipper on the left, Ursa Minor on the right, and we see the pointer stars that actually don't really point exactly in the direction of Polaris, but here we see Polaris. And you can see here that Polaris is close to, but not really right at the North Celestial Pole. I think all astronomers know that. It's about 52 arc minutes, or about almost, but not quite, 2 moon diameters away from the actual North Pole. And so here we see Ursa Major and Draco and Ursa Minor and Camelot Pardalis. And you can see here that Draco, it's a really interesting constellation, because it really encircles Ursa Minor and the pole star. So I like shooting these, and you can see some M97 and some deep sky objects, M109 over there as well. There's not an awful lot to see in this area, but I like this. Then we move on, and I decided to shoot some stuff because I was there in May when Ursa Major was really quite prominently displayed. I decided to try to get something through the 6-inch refractor. And these photos are made from 1-minute exposures, and numerous of them that are stacked. But again, it's not a great photo, but you definitely can see some interesting color. And a fair amount of dust, and certainly the dust lanes. And so we see here a bunch of various stars all around, of magnitudes going down to 12th magnitude here. And I really like that. And here we see some other much fainter galaxies. So that's M51. Then the Pinwheel Galaxy, M101, which I really like as well. It's fainter, it's larger. I find it a little more difficult to photograph. Obviously I'm not using the best telescope to get something like this. And we see here that a lot of different knots in this galaxy have their own NGC numbers. They are their own deep sky objects, although they are embedded knots in the entire galaxy. And then a 14th magnitude galaxy here, another NGC galaxy, and a 14.9 galaxy over here. So in this area of the sky, there are several galaxies that it's easy to overlook if you're looking just for the main bright one. And I decided to put this together because this shows these two galaxies that aren't very far apart in the sky to exactly the same scale. And you don't get a chance to sort of imagine that. And so we can see how much bigger the Pinwheel Galaxy M101 is from M51. Okay, moving on. That's another one taken through the Large Telescope, and this is one. M106 with a number of galaxies. These were more experimental shots because a refractor is not necessarily the best one to shoot these with. But you can see here in M106, there's a little surprise. You see a lot of dark knots here. And again, these are just 1 minute exposures stacked. Edge on Galaxy here, which actually looks a little bit like the Sombrero Galaxy, M104. And here you can see, so magnitude 11.7. These are the distances, quite a long way away. And then this tiny little pair, it's really interesting. They look close, but the distance, as you can see, 50 million versus 350 million light years, they're very different. So they're merely line of sight close to each other. And when you're looking at these distances, we bear in mind that the Andromeda Galaxy is about 3 million light years away. So you can see how much further, an order of magnitude, these are than the Andromeda Galaxy. And then moving on, I think everybody knows this. The double cluster doesn't need any kind of introduction. I really like shooting this in the constellation of Perseus, just below in the fall sky, the W of Cassiopeia. These stars really, a lot of them are really blue, meaning young stars and quite hot stars. But there's some orange older ones there as well. This is now I like globular clusters. They are difficult to photograph and photograph well, and this may be one of the most difficult of all. And the reason is that M15 is one. Well, first of all, it's one of the oldest globular clusters known, but it's also incredibly densely packed. I've never seen a photograph that actually resolves M15 right to its core, and I had to do some sort of fancy processing to try to get as many of the stars as close into the core as I could. And I'm going to say that I'm reasonably happy with this. It's small, it's in Pegasus. I really like it. It's really quite easy to spot, but it is small. And for me anyway, I found it a challenge. And this is the best one I've ever been able to make to get of M15. And if we get a clear night, it's right up there because it's a fall object. Although you can see it also, in July and August, but much later in the night. All right, so you can see how ancient it is and how many stars there are. Okay, then moving on, many of you will know that I love shooting my favorite constellation, which is Cygnus the Swan. And here we see, I'll just put this out. Here we see the Northern Cross, well known here with Albireo, and the North American and Pelican Nebulae with the great ionized hydrogen clouds around Satyr Gamma Cygni. Down here, we have the Veil Nebula, the eastern and western parts, and then a little part that's not quite as well known, Pickering's Triangle there. I didn't have time this summer or enough clear nights to do a close-up of that. And all sorts of open clusters. Not many globular clusters in this part of the sky, mainly open clusters indicated by the green here. And then one of the great dark nebulae of the sky, Le Gentil 3. And here, this is the northern Colsac. Anybody who's been in the southern hemisphere knows of the Colsac, which is very close to Crux, the Southern Cross. And here we have the so-called northern Colsac in the Northern Cross. So I really like this part of the sky a lot. And to the right over here, we get down towards Scutum and then Sagittarius, the center of the Milky Way. A little bit closer view here, then we have brilliant Deneb, which is Alpha Cygni, the brightest star in Cygnus, an enormous star. If it were as close as our sun is to us, if its limb were on the horizon, its upper limb would be 60 degrees high. It is enormous and a great distance away. The North American Nebula here, the Pelican Nebula here, and then Satyr or Gamma Cygni. So a close-up of all of the great hydrogen alpha areas. Moving on into what is one of my favorite areas of the sky, Aquila and Scutum, the Shield, and Serpens. The Serpent, there are two separate parts to this constellation. And what we get here is a lot of dark globules, a lot of foreground dark nebulae studied intensively by E.E. Barnard in the US, and therefore named for his catalog the B numbers, B102, B112, etc. He made a great study of these, and I love this area of the sky. And this is shot with a camera lens mounted just piggyback on top of the telescope. A little bit closer. This is one of the most interesting Messier objects, M24. Many people think that it's been misnamed, that it wasn't actually a Messier object. It's really just a star cloud, but it's a very bright and prominent star cloud in northern Sagittarius. Quite easy to photograph again. This is the accepted outline of it. It has some open clusters, as these objects tend to, and then a very prominent dark nebula, well known, B92 in this area. And then we get into Scutum, and the best object there, very well known to everybody, M11, the so-called wild duck cluster. And I really do like this a lot. What we often tend to overlook is the dark nebulae that are all around it, because it's such a pretty, sort of, beautiful, gossamer stardust object to look at. And a lot of these are named, as you can see. Another pretty little open cluster there. So I really like M11. And I'll say just today, I photographed I processed a closer view in view of M11. And what's really prominent here, and what you can really see, is that it's a young cluster with hot blue and fairly young stars. I'm probably getting fairly close to the end, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Right in Aquila, you get an awful lot of dark nebulae as well. And then just a few. These are always really low in the sky. So we have Antares here, and we have great nebulosity. And I was really surprised. From Ontario, it's really hard actually to get the colors of these nebulae. I happened to get a very dark sky in July to photograph this, and I was just really pleased with that. It's a beautiful area of the sky. Then the Sagittarius, the very well-known Sagittarius clusters of the Omega Nebula here, and M18, the open star cluster. So you can see the open star cluster here. M17 and M18, and very close to the M24 star cloud, with another very large NGC open cluster there. These are well-known objects in the sky, and then the Eagle Nebula. Another view. This is made famous by the famous Hubble telescope photo, the so-called pillars of creation. What you can do with a little telescope to show them, obviously not 1% as well as Hubble did, but there's something. And this is one that I actually just recently processed, showing this as well. You can see the pillars of creation right in here. Again, 1 minute exposures, that's all these are. And then one of my favorite areas of the sky. This is frankly the kind of photograph that I'm able to get in Australia. I never thought I'd be able to get this a photo that I think is a pretty good one from Canada. With these objects only about 22 to 24 degrees high in the sky. This was in August, by the way, as well, when they were starting to get a little bit lower in the sky. So I was fairly happy to get this. The sky contrast was really quite good. And so we have M8, obviously the Lagoon Nebula on the right, and then the very pretty Trifid Nebula on the left, with its combination of reflection, blue, and emission, pink-red nebulosity. And then a closer view of M8, the Lagoon Nebula, with various Barnard dark nebulae in it as well. So yeah, interesting, but 4,000 light years distant, fairly almost next door to us, actually. And then I will finish up with something that some of you will have seen. So exactly 1 year ago, there was no pandemic. There actually was flying around the world. And so this photograph will be familiar to those of you who see Sky News. This was the photograph that was a 2-page spread in the March edition of Sky News, and the photo that I got from Australia, super wide angle of the center of the Milky Way straight overhead, and something that we will never again see in our lifetimes. Jupiter here and Saturn down here, straddling on either side of the central bulge of our Milky Way galaxy. And I was quite fortuitous that I was down there at this time to be able to get it. And with that, I will simply thank you. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic images, really, really nice, well done. Congrats on getting beautiful images. And also images of the comet. Those are really nice. And believe it or not, you are the first person showing comet images in our Recreational Astronomy Night meetings.
Oh my goodness, wow. There
Yeah,
you go. People have been staying indoors.
yeah. I haven't been able to get anybody else to show us their comet photos. I know
Oh,
a
well,
lot of
there you go.
taking photos. So thanks again.
You're
Very
very
good.
welcome.
So let's go to some questions from Enio and the audience.
So we have two questions from Lewis Rifkin. The first question is, have you ever had any issues with bears? And the second question is, how often do you go out to shoot?
Okay, well, the first question, I haven't had issues with bears, but I've had a lot of encounters. I've had encounters with both Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. But wait a minute, I don't think that that's what you're talking about. No, I haven't. I do a lot of canoeing in Algonquin as well and camping, and I've seen fresh bear tracks. I hear wolves, don't see them. I hear a lot of moose in around my observing area. There are a lot of moose that come, and so in the middle of the night or 3 in the morning, I'll hear grunting and snuffling, and I'll take my little headlight and go over, and I'll see a moose just looking up at me. And these are big animals. So no, the bears don't bother me. They're not up as late as I am. And sorry, the second question was?
How often do you go out to shoot?
I go out when it's clear every new moon if I can. And if there's any possibility of it being clear, I will drive 285 kilometers, which is from our house in Midtown Toronto, up to Algonquin Park, set up, shoot, drive back to Toronto, and then go to work the next morning. At my age, I don't have that many years of astrophotography left, and some of you will know that this year in May I celebrated my 50th year as a member of the RASC. So I've been doing this a long time. That'll give you an idea how old I am.
From Sharada we have, is there an app that will superimpose the lines, names of stars on a photo?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I get that asked all the time. There may very well be, but I'm not aware of one. What I do, and I'll just explain this very quickly, so I know this may be the last question. Those of you who follow my stuff know that I use my favorite planetarium app is Dave Lane's Earth-Centered Universe. It doesn't have all the fancy graphics and so on, but it has very precise constellation boundaries and so on. And what I can do is I can take screenshots of that and then in Photoshop superimpose them on top of my photograph, and then sort of bend, contort, and transform it so that all of the stars exactly line up, and then I can trace the constellation boundaries and the exact outlines and boundaries of the deep sky object. So that's how I do it. Now, it takes a long time. If I'm doing one of these photographs, for example, of Cygnus, it'll take me 2 hours to do all of that work, but there isn't anything that I know that does it accurately and automatically.
And the last question is from Blake and Carol. What do you use for stacking?
I use Registar. I know that is outmoded. I know that that the new Photoshop, which I use Photoshop CS6, which is the slightly older one. The new Photoshop will do that. I know that Alan Dyer, probably Canada's preeminent astrophotographer, uses Photoshop to do his stacking. I use Registar. It still works fine. I did a couple of photos today using Registar. It stacks, it registers the images very well. Then you crop them, save them, and then in Photoshop, I superimpose all of my images on top of each other, and that's what produces these photos.
And another question just came in from Riza Mohammed. Do you stack images with different ISOs?
Very good question. No, I don't. You probably can, but after I've taken some test photos, whenever I'm doing a new object, I'll take some test photos, very short exposures at very high ISOs to center the object to get exactly where I want. And then I reduce it down to the ISO that I want, where I can shoot for a 60-second exposure, take one, test one to make sure it works. And then I do anywhere between 6 and 20 identical exposures, identical in every respect, including ISO. I find that that produces the best stacked images. That better be it. I think I've more than used up my time.
That's all the questions we have currently on YouTube. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Michael.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you, and I'll be in touch for another presentation in a few months.